Tell me about where you were born and your earliest years a little bit, please.
I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, January 26, 1947. At the time of my birth, my father was completing his doctorate at Boston University.
And then did you move to Louisiana?
No.
Or no? Okay.
No.
You were there for a good period of time?
No, when Dad finished Boston, we moved to St. Louis, Missouri, where I stayed with my grandfather for a little bit.
Tell me a little bit more about your parents. I believe they had particular roles that helped shape you.
Indeed. My father, of course, is a very prominent pastor in the United Methodist Church and in the Methodist colleges. And my mother was also a teacher, both at the K-12 level and also at the collegiate level.
And your father also was a professor?
Yes, yes.
So could you talk a little bit about your early family life as far as where you fit in the line of children perhaps in your family?
Sure.
And the role given your parents that they had in education, how that affected you growing up?
Well, I'm the oldest of 4 children, to my mom and dad, and my brother Walter was after me, and my oldest sister Angela, and then my youngest sister Leland. And of course, we grew up in a household of educators, and religion was very prominent, and it was difficult not to be inspired to want to learn as much as you could while you could. My mother taught French, so it's very interesting growing up. And we had music everybody. We all tried to play the piano at one point. There was always a piano in the house.
So do you still play the piano?
No, we don't have a piano in this house.
But you played then?
Yes, appreciate music of all kinds. Indeed. Interesting guy, but he could read 5 languages. He's a little genius, so he's always challenged us with questions and answers, and kept things going. Never a dull moment.
So
He's stressed. Intellectual curiosity makes a difference in people. If you lack that, you're not going to be successful.
And did you have different languages at the dining room table, or
No.
no? You always spoke in English, but they had this vast additional knowledge.
Yes, absolutely.
And was there the sense that you knew that pursuing an education was going to be important for you, given that both your parents were educators?
Well, that didn't have to be stated. It was just assumed. Grew up in a household. What are your options? You want to be like them. So I was fortunate. I didn't have to worry about career choices. I kind of knew what I wanted to do.
What does that mean? What did you want to do?
Be in education.
So you had that as an early thought that was where you were headed.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about your experiences with schooling, even elementary school, and what kind of schools you went to even before you pursued college? What you remember, what stands out about that time in your life?
Well, I'm a product of segregated education. I went to segregated schools all the way up through high school, and I wouldn't trade that experience for nothing in the world. Even though we had limited resources, I had great teachers who made us competitive.
Does that dispel a myth, perhaps, about segregated education?
Well, the myth is, and we don't give ourselves enough credit as a people, but those of us who went through segregated education, we did very well. Indeed, we formed the basis of the black middle class that we have today. I wouldn't trade these teachers for nothing in the world. They all encourage us to do our best. And it makes a difference when a black person tells another black person, you got to be competitive. We don't do that anymore.
What is a recollection of a particular teacher? Do you remember any time during that time of segregated education who was particularly influential in your life?
Well, I had a number, but at the lower level, Miss Mazik was my first grade teacher, and she was very inspiring, encouraging us to read as much as we could. And as my father would say all the time, you got to be able to name at least 3 teachers who made a difference in your life, and you can't name 3, then you weren't taught well. So I can name more than 3, but that would take a long time.
Can you talk a little bit about your college years, and starting with Southern, how
Southern
you ended up
University.
going there, and what you studied, and
Sure.
why it was important?
Well, I graduated from the Southern University Laboratory School, which was connected to Southern. And and I was an athlete, and I was a pretty good athlete at that. And so I got a football scholarship to the university. But before I graduated from the lab school, I was actually taking courses in college, because that's what the lab school was, connected to the university. So we took courses for credit. So I got a start on my collegiate career by being a laboratory student graduate. Yeah, and I'm a proud graduate of the lab school.
And what did you study there?
History. Well, I was president of my senior class, number 10
Number 10
in the class.
in the class.
Yeah.
Congratulations, belatedly.
Yeah.
And then from Southern, you moved on to Carnegie Mellon.
Correct.
What was the reason you chose Carnegie Mellon after being at a historically black school?
Well, Carnegie Mellon literally recruited me. They offered me a fellowship to come study for my master's. I never paid to go to college.
What did you study there, and what's your fondest memory of
American
that?
history.
Mm-hmm.
American history. And as I said, when I got there, I was surprised I knew more than they did.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I mean, I just well, let's just take the class on social and intellectual history. Fortunately, I had read a great deal. I've always been an avid reader. So sitting in Dr. Schoenwald's class, I was the only black in the class. And of course, this is during a time of change in culture in America. The Vietnam War was going on, all of that. The ability to interact over the materials, be conversant about what was going on in the world and life. It even amazed me that I knew all this stuff. Amazed Dr. Schoenwald too.
What year was that?
1968.
So that was a big year in our nation's history.
Yes.
What was it like being at a school like Carnegie Mellon when all of the turmoil of 1968 was going on? What do you remember about things that happened that year while you were there?
A lot was happening. Of course, I had been drafted for the Army, and while I'm in graduate school, and Vietnam was going on, and you got to look at it every day on the news, and I'm in graduate school at the same time. So you're asking yourself now, what's going to happen? Am I going to have to report for duty, or am I going to complete my graduate school education? And I had just gotten married, so, and we didn't have any children. So it was a real interesting time, But the one thing that my parents taught me, and they got me through all of this, stay focused on what you want to do. And that's what I did. I completed my master's degree in a year. I was on fire. If you tell me I got to do something, I'm going to do it. I'm a competitor at heart.
So could you talk a little bit more about 1968, since you mentioned that being such a pivotal year in your personal life? What do you remember of King's assassination, of all that was happening in that year? Was it difficult to be studying at that time in the midst of all this, especially as you were studying or preparing to study for history in school?
No, not to me. Now, I remember when King was assassinated, but my family knew King, so my mother and King were classmates in Atlanta, Georgia. My father knew King very well. King went to Boston too, but my dad was in front of him. So we knew about that. My father was very active in the civil rights movement. So, but I wasn't deterred from my goal, which was to get a good education. And all these things were going around. Remember, I played sports too, but I was a very focused individual. I knew, I was not immune to what was going on, but remember the Vietnam War was going on too, and I had friends of mine who were drafted. And I had that hanging over my head, would I be drafted? And I'll never forget when I was in Pittsburgh, I was called to the physical examination for the Army. And what struck me, we had to take examination, the Army test. And I tried to fail it on purpose. But you have to be a moron to fail the Army test because they were looking for people. And I passed the physical the first time. And then I petitioned for a second physical because I'm asthmatic. And I didn't think they picked all this stuff up, so I called my dad. He said, well, we'll send the doctor's certificate, but that you're an asthmatic. So I took another physical. But before that, people did a lot of interesting things during that period to avoid the draft. Because I was convinced if I went, I probably wasn't coming back. But at any rate, so the night before the second physical, it was in February, I believe it was, I stood out on the balcony of our apartment. It was probably like about 15 degrees in Pittsburgh that night, but I was naked. And I just stood out there for about 3 hours. And then I went inside and covered myself up in blankets. So I could be sure I was sick that morning when I went to the physical. And I was. And when the sergeant at the desk saw me, he just stamped, not approved. And I walked out. I wasn't drafted. And I looked back on that and I said, was that right to do or was that wrong to do? And then the war ended. At any rate, so I didn't go to Vietnam. And see, people don't realize, you're in graduate school and you gotta go. You want to be successful, but being a warrior was not my goal at the time. I wasn't against the war per se, because my friends went and they served honorably and so forth, and I respected that. But I knew I had to do something else. And I'm a great believer in the military, truly, I am. I don't say thank you for your service to any veteran. I always say I will never forget. That's more important. Because of them, we can do all of these things. If they're not around, we're toast.
Thank you.
That's just a fact.
Appreciate you really helping people understand that time period. So then you moved directly on to Ohio State, or did you do more before that?
No, I left Carnegie, went back to Southern, where I taught history for 1 year. And then after meeting with the dean and the vice president, he said, we want you to go back to school. You have a lot of promise. If an opportunity presents itself, you can do that, do it. So we left and went to University of Illinois in Champaign, where I studied history, and where my wife got her master's degree in University of Illinois. But I didn't complete my studies because I got a fellowship, the Washington Internship in Education, run by George Washington University. So they had me assigned to the state superintendent of Illinois. So we moved to Springfield, where I was on the staff. And that's when I said, well, you know, I better get a doctorate in education. So when I left Springfield, that's when we went to Columbus, Ohio.
And when you were going to Ohio State.
Right.
And what did you earn there?
A PhD. In higher education administration.
So how was it that you ended up in Washington, D.C.? Could you explain that?
Well, I was working for the president of Ohio State, and Harold Anderson. And Harold said, Leonard, I think you need a Washington experience. You have a lot of promise. And if an opportunity presents itself to go to D.C., take it. And Harold himself had worked for Harry Truman, the President of the United States, so he talked to me about the importance of having Washington in your background. So one of my colleagues was running an institute here in Washington called ISE, Institute for Services Education. So he called me and said, look, your dissertation is on the desegregation of higher education, and I've got an institute funded by the Ford Foundation that's looking at this. I want to interview you to be the director. Can you come and interview? And so a light bulb went off my head. It says, Washington, D.C. So I flew here, 1976, interviewed with Dr. Blake, and he offered me the job, and I accepted. So then we moved.
We'll go back to your career, but now that you're in Washington, can you tell me the story of how you came to become connected with Asbury United Methodist Church?
Well, after getting here in 1976, because I always check with my dad, I said, Father, where should I try to go to church now that I'm here? And Dad said, well, you probably want to go where my friend is at Asbury, Frank Williams. And that's how I went.
Frank Williams was pastor from 68 to 84, I believe. And what is it that you remember about him?
I liked him. Frank was a friend of my dad, so he was a passionate person and very thoughtful. And I remember his sermons, he'd always take deep breaths. And he cried in the pulpit when he preached. Yeah.
And what was Asbury like then? Was it prominent in the Washington community, for instance?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was a great congregation. The church was literally full every Sunday.
What year did you become a member of Asbury?
I think it was 77.
So obviously your father recommended that you go to Asbury, but you didn't have to stay there. What was your draw? Why was it that you were interested in joining?
Well, as I said, I mean, my father said as his friend, you know, that's enough for me.
Okay. So can you talk about what some of your key areas of involvement have been at Asbury, things that you have led and been involved in?
Well, I was on the administrative council. Reverend Williams had me on that, and I participated in that.
Reverend Frank Williams again.
Mm-hmm. Administrative council, that was one thing I remember. That was my first. They used to have it. I don't think they have it anymore, but that's when all the church leaders would convene, you know, to go over what's going on in the church and so forth. So I did that.
Do you remember any big decisions that were made during that time frame, which I believe you also were chair at one point?
No, that was a later time.
Okay.
When I was on the trustee board.
Okay.
I don't really remember any things that stand out from the administrative council. I really don't, to be honest.
What about some of the other activities you have had at Asbury?
Well, my kids were very active in the Sunday school, so we always got them to Sunday school, and it was a great Sunday school program. wife was on the child care board and so forth. So then,
I understand you were on staff parish committee at some point?
at one point, yes, I
Mhm.
was. That was under Reverend Matthews.
Reverend Eugene Matthews.
Right.
Mhm.
Gene.
Also male chorus, or were you musical in that way?
No, I never did.
But you were an usher?
Yes, and on the trustee board.
And that was about for several years as well. Do you remember
The
when that
trustee
was?
board was 3 years.
What kind of challenges was the church facing at the time? Because being a trustee, you have to deal with whatever comes along.
Well, I tell you, the trustees, God bless them, because they get calls about everything. From the bathrooms, to the heat, to the air conditioning, to the roof, to the choir, to the robes. It's involved.
Was there something in particular that list you remember having to deal with?
I think one time we had a bad storm and a couple of trees snapped or something, and that was a problem. But you know, as church with limited resources, which we have sometimes, we had to step in and make sure we were able to take care of it. I think it was Mr. Nero who called me.
James Nero?
Yeah.
To let you know that something had to happen.
Yeah, he was a trustee at that.
I understand that you've been very supportive of United Methodist Men.
Yes.
What would you say about that? I mean, some people know that it's a group of men that meet, but people may not understand what it accomplishes, what it achieves. What's been important for you in that role?
Well, I think one of the things that strike me is that the organization of the United Methodist Church is not fully appreciated by the members. They don't really know what the Methodist denomination is all about. Fortunately, I kind of do, because my grandfather was United Methodist minister, my dad, my uncles, my aunt, all very active, so I had an appreciation of the structure. And every denomination has a structure. And part of the thing that makes Methodism go is the way it's organized, and the men have a role, the women have a role. And all this feeds into what the discipline says. And it goes back to Mr. Wesley himself. And people forget it was this guy who founded Methodism. He and his brother. And we lose sight of that sometimes in this, how do I say this, attempt to blot out the history of the Methodist Church. And I'm not that way. I believe in history. I don't believe in tearing down anything. Let it stand. So people are going to ask the question, why is it here? You've got to explain it.
In what way do you think there's been attempts to blot out the United Methodist history?
Well, this latest controversy over who should be in the church.
So you're speaking of the church's recent decision to affirm its Book of Disciplines ruling
Correct.
that homosexuality is incompatible with
Correct.
Christian teaching.
Correct.
So does it make you feel hopeful or concerned about the future of the United Methodist Church given the decisions that have been made this year regarding that?
Well, all denominations are struggling today because the younger generation has no purpose. That's what's happening. They have no focus. They're all over the map. It's now the screen people versus the book people. They're looking at these screens all day. And you cannot Google your way to intelligence. They think they can. Explosion of information of all kinds. Half of it's not true, but they don't know that. So it is a scary period in many ways in this country, because the foundation of America is built on some key principles, and we don't respect that. this country's not going to function. And what I see is a proliferation of ignorance. People who don't know. And worse, too many people who don't want to know.
All right, thank you for that. I want to go back to United Methodist Men for a minute. I just want to make sure I didn't leave out anything related to that. In particular, Christmas in April is a project I understand you were involved in. Is that something that resonated with you in particular, or any other project of United Methodist Men?
No, I was not involved in that. But I've always tried to be supportive of what the men are doing. You know, I pay my assessments and so forth. And that's important. That's a demonstration that you think it's important. Why else would you pay your assessment?
One United Methodist Men member told me of your involvement in the church generally and said, name it and he's done it. So I'm wondering what has meant the most to you of all the activities at Asbury and why?
I think the Men's Day has been important. You know, the men get a chance to express themselves. I had the privilege of speaking at the Men's Day breakfast a couple of years ago. I really enjoyed that. Got a great response to what I had to say.
Do you remember what you talked about?
Education.
What was your main message to them?
We need more. And we need to be more competitive if we're going to be successful. And there's a role for religion in that space.
What do you mean?
Helps you focus. And you have to have faith in your capabilities to do these things. And religion is basically a question of faith. You either believe it or you don't.
And that can undergird your desire to pursue an education and stick with it?
Correct. You're not going to be successful without it. Not in this society.
You also spoke about the significance of HBCUs during Asbury's HBCUs and Greek Organizations Sunday.
Yes.
I believe in 2018.
Yes.
What is it like to bring this message that you have basically preached for years to your own congregation?
Well, the message I was trying to convey as the United Methodist Church has been key to the development of the historically black college community. And I named all the schools, the colleges that are connected to United Methodist Church to remind the congregation who they were, because I think many of our members don't know. And part of the problem that we have is people who don't know, you know, not that they're ignorant, but they're just indifferent to what has to happen. And the colleges need our support because they're in the business of training young people to be better. And the black colleges are very, very important. They're in the federal law. I want people to understand that. Because if you were founded before 1964 for the express purpose of educating African Americans, the federal government has designated you as a historical black college. So you're in the federal law. You're not a race-based institution. You're not a suspect class. Unlike Hispanic institutions, you know quotas. There's none of that. They're historic about what they are. They are historic. And they deserve the undivided attention of the nation. Without them, we'd have to create them. That's how they made a tremendous difference in this country.
I want to ask before we move off of Asbury, what has had special meaning for you personally as far as events that have occurred in your life at Asbury?
Well, when my brother died, 1981.
What was his name?
Walter. It was Reverend Williams who comforted the family. My father was not here. He had to fly up from Louisiana, but my brother died here. So the expressions from the church are very important. always be remembered for that period. Yeah.
And then on the happier side, you had some weddings or baptisms?
Yes, both of my, well, one of my sons, Leonard IV, he was married in the church. And then my grandchildren have been baptized in the church. Also memorable occasions, yes.
And any other particular Asbury members that you recall most, and why?
Mr. I can't think of his name now, but he was the usher. I can think of his name. But anyway, he's the one that encouraged me to become an usher. He would work on me all the time. And Mr. Oh my God, I should know his name. But anyway, he said, "Hey, you gotta be an usher, you gotta be an usher." And then Anderson, Ron Anderson, who knows me, knows my family from Texas, because he's from, my father was at Wiley, so his brother and I were friends. So he said, yeah. So very important. And then Bishop Stiff, he was a friend.
Bishop Forrest Stiff.
Yeah, and he and my father were friends too. So and I always like to talk to him.
Some people probably just walk by the ushers, don't think much about them. Is there a reason why you've been an usher? Does it mean something?
Well, I enjoy it. You know, it's a way of serving, giving back. You know, and it's not taxing. So when Mr. Willie calls me on the phone, it's your turn.
Willie Scott.
Yeah, and I said, well, Willie Clark. Mr. Clark, I said, okay, I'll be there.
Is there anything you recall about how Asbury has responded to important events during the decades? I mean, during the time you've been there, there have been anniversaries of some major events, like the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. Mm-hmm. Are there other things?
I spoke, I was interviewed at the church for that. I sure was. I remember that.
TV station? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What did you have to say about that event?
Well, they wanted to know what was my experience like that, and I was able to tell them about my mother's relationship with Dr. King and my father's. That was good.
So your mother was in grade school with Dr. King?
High school.
High school?
Right, they lived in the same neighborhood, yeah. Dr. King tried to date my mother. She wouldn't go out with him, but she didn't think he amounted to much. That's a true story.
Did she ever remark about how he progressed after that?
And she called him ML. They live in the same neighborhood. I'll never forget, we were watching TV and King was speaking one time, and Mama said, there go ML talking again. I said, Mom, you know this guy? Do I know him? That's what she told me. He was quite a ladies' man. I said, I wouldn't go out with him. Then my dad started laughing. But it's funny, but when my mother was at graduate school at Clark, Atlanta, we were living in Orangeburg. She and my sister would ride the bus down to Atlanta. So you go to class, and King would pick them up and take them over to her mama's house. So they stayed friends.
And your father and he were in school together, but
different
not
time.
Different time. They were not at the same time.
But my uncle was a classmate of his, Uncle Rolla. They were in class. They were the same study group.
What did your uncle say about him?
Oh, yeah, they're all friends. All Atlanta, Georgia people. Yeah. They're all smart. My uncle was a classmate of Andy Young. They went to the same high school, Gilbert Academy, New Orleans. And I was speaking at Russ College, the commencement speaker, and Andy was getting his ambassador was getting his honorary degree. So we were riding back to the airport. He said, Haynes, I remember your uncle. I know him. I said, I know. He said, well, we had a lot of fun.
So you have numerous civil rights connections.
Yeah, yeah. My dad's one of the original founders of SCLC.
Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Right. You know them all.
And are there any other important events to mention related to Asbury's DC or DC history that's had special meaning to you?
Well, I think the 175th, well, not the anniversary when Shockley was there.
Louis Shockley?
Yeah, that was, I'm glad, I'm so happy to see that celebration. And Mrs., can't think of her name right now, but anyway, the Pearl, the reenactment of
The Edmondson family?
yeah, you know, the lady who coordinated that, she did a great job on that. Mrs., you know what I'm talking
Bradford, Grace Bradford.
about. Miss Bradford, they put that together. Yeah, that was great. And the cornerstone of the church is in the main lobby, as you know. I mean, in the narthex. And I look at it every time I come in, which reminds me how far we've come. But it also says how far we need to go. That's the amazing thing. You see, history doesn't, you know, I said, too many people who believe that history doesn't begin until they show up. Therefore, there's no need to know anything. All you need to know is what I'm doing. I just don't believe that. I'm sorry. We just suspect this thing has been going on a long time. And guess what? When we go, it's going to still keep going. That's why I'm in the field of education. Because it's one of the very few fields that confers immortality. Because what you do in education lives long after you're gone. That's why you have to do your best. My greatest joy is when people who I've taught come up to me, and they do over the years. Thank you, Dr. Haynes. You made a difference in my life. That's all I need. It wasn't about the money. It's about making a difference.
Well, we will now segue into a little bit more about DC and your roles within education.
Yes.
In which neighborhood did you live after you first arrived in DC in '76? I'm wondering about a typical day, what it was like then.
We've always lived in Silver Spring.
Okay, you never lived in the city.
Never lived in the city. Our first residence was inside the Beltway, in right off of Georgia. It was off Georgia Avenue. Woodland Drive. That's where we stayed.
Well, still, even if you didn't live in DC, you spent time in DC. What was it like in the '70s? What do you remember about DC in the '70s?
Washington, well, my office was on S Street, so I was in the city all the time.
This was at the Institute for Services to Education?
Yes, and then I was there for 3 years, and then I went down to the Land Grant Association, which is at DuPont Circle. So I was always, you know, around Washington. And Washington, very interesting. Marion Barrett, well, first when I got here, Harold Washington, he was the first, Walter was the first mayor.
Walter Washington.
And then Marion came after him.
Marion Barrett.
Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting time in D.C. They were in the process of building the subway system and, you know, digging up stuff. And a lot of people running around with business cards and giving them out, you know, and getting in touch, well, getting, how do I say this, the government workers of two sides, D.C. government, federal government.
It was thriving.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, what struck me about the area, I was in Sligo Park one day, and I saw a group of black men, young guys my age, playing touch football. So I went over and joined the game, you know. Didn't know them, they didn't know me. And then someone got hurt during the game. And then I heard this statement, "Stay right where you are, man. Let me go get my bag." Yeah, I said, "Now what is they talking about, bag?" And then this other guy said, "No, man, my car is closer. Let me get my bag." You know who I was playing football with? a group of black doctors. One was ear, eye, nose, throat, 2 internal medicine guys. One was a specialist. And that told me you're in a different area. I had never been around 11 black medical doctors in my life in one place. And I'll never forget that experience. I told my wife, Mary, I had a PhD. I said, Mary, we're in a different area. This doesn't exist anywhere else in the world.
And this was in the mid-1970s?
Yeah, 78, 77, 78. Then I was looking at the basketball coach of that was in the tournament, NCAA tournament. He went to Duke. I'll think of his name in a minute, but anyway. So I played basketball with him in Sligo Park. So I mean, it was a lot of stuff. You know, I've always been an athlete. So I said, man, I told Lenny, I said, Lenny, you know, I played ball that boy. It was an exciting time. You know. Played a lot of tennis. Because there was a lot of tennis players in the D.C. area.
And these are professionals who were also
Yeah.
sports, had
Yeah.
great sports ability.
Yeah.
So both
Yeah.
and, not just one or the other.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good place to be. And the schools were good. Of course, my kids were going to Montgomery County schools, and they were good schools.
So can you talk a little bit about your work a little bit more with the Institute for Services to Education and then moving to the land grant
Sure.
colleges organization?
Well,
what was it like? This was really sort of the beginning of your DC career.
Yeah. At ISE was kind of a black think tank, provided a lot of technical assistance to historically black colleges, and my role was the director of the Desegregation Institute. The reason Dr. Blake asked me to come is because we had the civil rights actions involving the historically black public colleges, seeking remedies for the vestiges of segregation. So very, very involved in a lot of policy work and the like, and I did my first book with the Institute. Critical examination of the Adams case. And that way I had to work with a lot of the black college presidents and advocacy groups and the like, so developed a good reputation for doing a number of things.
Could you explain the Adams case briefly? And
The Adams litigation was filed in 1976, and essentially it was to contest the southern states who were not treating their public black institutions fairly under the law, and they were not funding them at the level they were supposed to. It was supposed to be, quote, separate but equal, but it was never equal. It was always unequal. And so the plaintiffs in the case filed a suit in federal court, and the Adams litigation came out that the states had to provide more support to their public black institutions. These were in the southern states where you had, even Maryland's case is back up again though, but in Georgia, for example, Louisiana, Texas, Florida, and the like. So I became sort of one of the higher education experts on desegregation remedies and so forth.
what would you say would be a key success of that work?
Well, the fact that we were able to bring this out in open. Yeah. A lot of people didn't know this had been the case.
And so things improved for those institutions as a result?
Somewhat. Still not quite there, but much better than where it was. And,
so when you left DC for a part of the 80s, what were some of your main roles away from the city before you came back?
I went, when I left I left in '82 to become executive vice president of Southern University System in Louisiana.
And then you also were first in the Louisiana State Department of Education?
Yeah, I was assistant superintendent for academic programs, first black in that job. K-12 was a state official.
What was it like to be in the state of Louisiana as a first African American in a position like that?
It was fun. It was my home. You know, I knew these people. I knew who they were. Knew what they were capable of doing. They knew what I could do too. And then I was appointed by the president to come back to Washington
You
in
returned.
1980. When I come back, '89.
And how had things changed, if they had, from the 70s? You were there now in the late 80s. Did you feel like there was a change in D.C. than when you were here previously?
Well, Marion was still the mayor, but that's when I came back. He was having this problem with Chiquita Moore.
So that was a big change for the city to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, she set me up. My man. I knew Marion well, too. He was a great mayor, but he had his issues. I was at Bob Johnson, who founded BET. I know all these people. Bob asked me for money when he didn't have no money once. But anyway, he's a billionaire now. But Bob had a little reception in Georgetown at his office. It was on a Wednesday night. And Marion came in. I'll never forget this experience. And he was high. And you know, everybody that was in the room. And I said, Bob, this is the man. He said, yeah, man, how about that? Only in America.
So this was in the 80s as well,
Yeah.
before he was no longer mayor.
That's right. So when I saw him on the TV that night, I called Mary and said, Mary, guess what he's done now? He said, no. I said, it's all on TV. Chiquita.
Do you think that DC has improved since then, or had struggles since then?
Oh, it's still struggling. Because you got two cities. East of Rock Creek Park is one thing, west is something else. It's two different environments. You know, Ward 4 versus Ward 8, are you kidding me? The 7th District Police Station. They got their hands full. Nobody rides through Alabama Avenue and Malcolm X not alert. If you are not alert, you're going to be in trouble.
I was wondering if there had been Asbury connections with the work you've been in DC, either in the past in the 70s and then more in the 80s, which is we were getting into now. Did you run across Asburyans in the workplace or not really? Did you run into them?
Yeah. Every now and then, I would see people who knew me. And just the other day, I was at the Department of Energy. And this lady who sang the national anthem was one of Everett's colleagues. And she saw me and she said, Haynes, I know you. And I said, yeah, it's Asbury. That's always good to see that, you know. It confirms why you interact with people, you know.
The connections are always there.
Yeah.
Can you describe a bit of your work done in DC since you came back to the city, mostly for the education department, and you're being first in that department?
Right. Well, when the control board was running the city, I came back after serving as acting president at Grambling. I had to go back to Louisiana. I was running the school, running Grambling. I came back. Connie Newman, who was the vice chair of the control board, asked me to go over to DC Public Schools to help the superintendent out. And so Arlene Ackerman was superintendent, so I was her senior advisor. And that's how I got to know how DC Public Schools actually operates. And that was an eye-opening experience. It wasn't about the kids, it was about something else. So I know who they are, and they know who I am, and they still around. I was thankful. But DC got issues. And the school system, as I said, one school system for East of Rock Creek Park, another for West.
It's all one name, but within the divisions within the city occur within the education
It ain't
aspect of the city.
it's
as
not
well.
rocket science. I mean, you know, I took a group of fifth graders in DC Public Schools out to American University for a program. I had Cortland Malloy was out. I got Cortland to speak for us. And I'll never forget that ride on the bus. And we got going up Mass Avenue, and these are all black kids. Mr. Haynes, where are we? I said, we're in DC. No, we out of state. We ain't know this exists. They got off the bus at AU. Never seen this place. And then out in Spring Valley, all the blacks who work for the water company, they'd have the picture ID on the outside of this shirt. It's going on still.
But what you just described was in the 1980s, 90s?
2000.
Around the year 2000.
Ain't changed. I left DC Public Schools in 2001. I was the principal for the day at the school in Northeast Washington. It'll come to me in a minute. Minor Elementary. That morning, I'm still working DC Public School. I was principal for that. I get to Minor. I get in the office, and the receptionist said, "Mr. Haynes, welcome to Minor." I was a little boy, like in 3rd grade. Your first thing you gotta do this morning, you gotta talk to this little kid. She held up a big rock. He threw this at one of our teachers this morning and just barely missed her. I looked to the little kid. You did what? Yeah. I said, come on with me. So we went in the office. I said, why did you do this? He wouldn't speak. I said, give me your mama's name. I'm gonna call her. He said, I don't have mama. You call my grandma. I called her on the phone. I said, I have your grandson. You know what she said? What has he done now? I said, he threw this rock. He just got put out not long ago. Y'all gonna put him out again? I said, where's his mother? She's on crack. So the reality of the urban experience jumped at me. That this is what we deal with every day. So how can you educate kids in this kind of environment? When he thinks he did nothing wrong. Somewhere around there, I had that rock. I always kept it. I don't know if it's around here or somewhere. Maybe downstairs. But it just reminds me of where we gotta go.
So that was in what year?
2000. Not that long ago. Let me tell you something. The movie The Black Panther came out not long ago, right? Generated a lot of excitement among African Americans. And I was happy. Because it gave African Americans a lot of movie roles and parts and, you know, and technology and all that. And it got them engaged. So somebody asked me, Dr. Haynes, have you seen the movie? I said, no. I have no desire to see it. Well, why is that? I ride public transportation in D.C. every day. I see Black Panthers every day. And they haven't seen the movie either. That's the issue.
What do you mean when you say you've seen Black Panthers every day?
They're crazy. They fight on the subway. They curse. They scare people. They black. And I want to say so bad, y'all can't act like this. But I'm afraid to do it. Why? Because you don't know what they got.
So is there an answer here?
It's education. We got to do a better job. And parents got to get engaged. Problem is, with many Americans, not just black people, they don't place a high value on the importance of getting a good education. They just don't. That's why we got these issues.
Okay.
They don't value education.
I want to go back to when you first were at the education department. You were the first African American to serve as assistant secretary in the
For post-secondary education, correct.
That was in the late 80s, early 90s.
That was 89 through 91. Mm-hmm.
What was it that you felt like you brought to that position?
Well, of course, I was confirmed by the United States Senate 100-0. That doesn't happen anymore for anybody. Which meant that they thought I could make a positive contribution. And that's what I did. What
would you say was your main hallmark in that role?
I elevated international education as a priority. The first assistant secretary to do that.
When you say international education, what do you mean?
What I mean, international education as a priority in this country. We do need to be engaged internationally.
Including the Fulbright program, you were involved in seeing that, overseeing it.
Later, I was director of academic programs for the State Department, and Fulbright was under me, right.
But are you speaking of Americans needing to go abroad and expand their learning? What do you mean exactly as far as that being important?
Well, you can't operate in the global marketplace without some knowledge of the international community. That's what I'm talking about. We're in competition with other societies. They know more about us than we know about them. That's unacceptable. Worst thing that happens when Americans go abroad, too many of them, they go what I call theme park experiences. Then they look for the McDonald's and the KFC to eat. That's arrogance of ignorance. Then they come home, they don't tell anybody about anything. You'll never know. Did you go? It didn't make a difference in your life. It's sad.
So even when the average American travels internationally, it should be an educational experience.
Should be.
Not just a recreational experience, in your opinion.
Right. Absolutely. When you add value to your life, you don't learn anything from people. Or you don't know where you're going.
You served as acting president, you mentioned briefly, at Grambling State University in Louisiana from 97 to 98.
Yes.
Given all your years of advocacy at HBCUs, what was it like to run one?
A good experience. I enjoyed it.
I think you maybe helped it overcome some major deficit?
Oh, absolutely.
When
I took over, it was a $3.5 million deficit. Yeah. And I had to eliminate it because under Louisiana law, you cannot run a deficit at the end of the fiscal year in any public entity. If you do, the head of the agency goes to jail. I was not going to wear an orange suit with numbers. We were going to eliminate that deficit.
So how did you do it?
I made prudent decisions, cut staff, cut programs, did what was necessary. Grambling had over 1,000 employees for 5,000 students. It was like an employment factory. And I said, we just can't do that. Got too many people working here who are not doing work. My dad used to tell me it's hard to take a job from a black person. You know they need the money. But I didn't believe that when I took over Grambling and said, I'm going to take some jobs. They got to do something else. We just can't lay up and do nothing. It's hard to deal with black folk in some arenas. We got that in the district and the government. We got people on jobs who don't do any work. It's no rocket science. You get a job, do your job.
Are you more hopeful about DC government now?
No, it's not going to change.
All right. So in 2007, you became executive director of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities.
Correct.
And what would you say was your greatest achievement in that role?
Changed the way we viewed the implementation of the executive order.
The executive order for
The colleges, right? You see, President Carter signed the first executive order for historically black colleges, called the White House Initiative. Purpose, of paraphrases, to increase and expand the participation of historically black colleges in the program, grants, and contracts of the federal government. Every president since Carter has signed that order, and they each added their own little twist to it. So when I took over, it was under President George W. Bush, and he had an emphasis on private sector. So I stepped up the opportunity for the colleges to engage more with the private sector by using their position with the federal government to leverage that relationship, and that was very successful. We had probably one of the best annual conferences we've ever had under my leadership in 2008.
And so you served in roles related to HBCUs over 3 different administrations, correct? Or at least 3 education department roles. 3 administrations you served in different education roles, correct?
Yes, I would say so. Let's see. Bush, both the Bushes and Obama. Yes, on 3.
If you look at your work overall in education, which I realize is hard to do probably because it's been so lengthy and so extensive, what would you say has been the greatest challenge as an administrator in education?
Not to get frustrated or angry at what you see. And my thing is always, it's another day, gotta go back at it. And my dad taught us early on, you got to press on. Don't dwell on stuff. Keep it moving. You can get frustrated and angry, but that'll deter you from your objective, which is to make improvement. I say all the time, your purpose in life is to make a positive contribution. Why? Because the alternative is unacceptable. It's that simple.
What about your fondest memories of this work that you have been doing?
Oh, as I say, I get people who come to me, thank you for helping us out. I get that all the time. And that's all you want. It's never about the money. Can you move the needle in a positive way? I was down at Florida A&M I spoke on Wednesday. And after I spoke, the people came up to me, thank you for what you said. I mean, that's what you want to hear. Because they remember this. And they'll remember Haynes spoke to us about this point.
What did you speak about at Florida A&M?
About the importance of education.
It's really your theme.
Yes, It's simple. I give them 5 F's. Focus, finish, follow up, follow through, and faith. You got to believe you can do these things. Because at the end of the day, you have to do it, not me.
How has your faith and your work intersected?
Well, I just said that. You got to believe in your capabilities to do these things. And you have to believe in some higher authority that orders the universe. And an appreciation of what has happened historically. You got to do that.
All right, thank you. In addition to your writing related to desegregation, which we talked about a little bit, you also compared leadership of black and white college presidents.
Yes.
What concerns do you have about United Methodist higher education institutions and especially affiliated HBCUs? Are you hopeful about their viability and confident about their future or not?
Well, as I said, if they didn't exist, they'd have to be created. That's number one, because they're meeting unmet needs. But it's a very uneven picture, too, because of their location, their current funding status, and their leadership is uneven. In the Methodist HBCUs, we have several great presidents, one of whom is retiring this year, Henry Tisdale at Claflin. He's been there for 26 years, I think. And Henry raised $100 million for Claflin. And Claflin is one of the most outstanding liberal arts institutions in the South, black or white. But it's consistency of leadership over time, right? David Beckley at Russ College, another Methodist school in Holly Springs, Mississippi. He's done an outstanding job. He's been there 23 years, and Russ has an outstanding reputation. So if you get the right person who's committed to the institution, and I mean committed, they never talk about themselves. It's always the institution. That makes the difference in a leader. And but in the Methodist tradition, we've got some uneven spots. I mean, even Dr. Dawkins down at Bennett College, they just had their recent challenge. She raised $9 million to try to help stabilize the budget. But do you know, some of her trustees wanted to fire her anyway. So we have governance issues, we have leadership issues. Because in the Methodist colleges, all of them are private. You know, they're not public institutions. And, I mean, Wiley is doing better, but they've got some struggles. They all have struggles with limited resource institutions. But what it takes is a commitment to say, okay, we can't do everything. What can we do well? And let's zero in on that. And that requires leadership.
So
I'm optimistic in a way that none of the schools are going to close on their own, by the way. They'll close because of other reasons. They either meet the accreditation standards or they don't have enough money. But the fact of the matter is, because they have made a difference, the country would benefit from their continued existence. Because it's the nation that needs people who are educated. The greatest threat to the United States of America is ignorance. Not a nuclear bomb, I'm sorry. We can survive that. We cannot survive ignorance.
So I believe you retired in 2016?
That's what they say.
And then you came out of retirement to serve as a senior advisor in the education department led by Betsy DeVos.
Right.
What are your primary roles, and what has been a key achievement for you since you returned to the education department in 2017?
Well, my primary role has been on the implementation of Executive Order 13779, which is the White House Initiative on Black Colleges. The Secretary's asked me to devote my energies, experience, and background, so we've made tremendous progress. Tremendous progress. It's not reported, but we know we have done a lot. We eliminated outstanding debt for 4 black colleges: Xavier, Dillard, Tougaloo, and Suno. And of course, Dillard is a Methodist school. $322 million. We cleaned the slate. That's larger than the budget for the National Endowment for the Humanities. That was impossible to even conceptualize that we would do this, but we did. We increased all the black college accounts in terms of funding, gave additional money for $38 million for Title III. We deferred the loans for $17 million, 17 schools. For Florida A&M, I was just there. The president told me that they just broke ground on a new academic building because we gave them $125 million to do so, the largest in the history of the program. And I was telling my colleague about it. He said, man, why don't want the media report this? I said, because it doesn't fit their narrative. They think somehow this administration is anti-this and that, but that's a lie. It's the fake news. We know what we're doing. And if we didn't do it, everybody would know about it.
That leads me to ask you how you navigate the current political environment when so many African Americans are not supportive of this current administration.
Because a lot of African Americans are ignorant. They just don't know. When they find out, damn, that happened. I said, that's because you watch CNN all day. And you're looking at the screen. You have no clue. That's the problem. We put ourselves into a coffin corner, and we get nothing for it.
Coffin corner.
Yeah, like on a football field. You kicked it in, put them down there, and they'll stay there. But the way it works in this country, you can be in the coffin corner, but guess what? The United States keeps going. I'm trying to get us out of the coffin corner so we can join the rest of the crowd that's moving forward.
I understand that the White House has named its HBCU Initiative Distinguished Service Award after you.
There it is right there.
And when did that happen, and how does that make you feel?
It happened in 2018 at the national conference. I was surprised when they announced that I received this award. And I was doubly surprised when they said, hereafter the award will bear my name. What an achievement. And it just confirms that what I've been trying to do is make a difference. And that's what it's all about. You know, and every time I get an award, it's an affirmation that, you know, your work has made a difference. And maybe you can inspire others to do the same.
And you've been honored by both Presidents Bush's and President Obama.
Right around the world.
What were the honors, and what do they mean to you?
Well, when I retired, I received letters from 3 United States presidents. I never thought that would happen. And they each commended me for my public service and the difference that I made on behalf of the country.
What did it mean
Very
to you?
few Americans could ever say that they got 3 letters from 3 presidents. And they're sitting right there on their wall.
Does it make you thankful, grateful?
Honored and appreciative that we do live in the greatest country on the face of this earth, where you can make a difference. I mean, we came out of slavery, 1619. Where's that book I just finished reading? We showed up 20 Africans off the boat. You can argue whether they indentured servants or slaves, it doesn't matter. The fact is we showed up. But we persevered. We came out of the emancipation with no reparations and no reconciliation commission. We didn't get a chance to sit across the table from our former slave masters and ask this question: how are we going to do this thing called freedom? What's your interpretation of that? Let me tell you what ours. We never had that conversation. And these black colleges grew up after the emancipation with no resources, but they were focused on training people to participate in the American democracy. I'm a product of that experience. And what motivates me is my dad would say, your success, son, is determined by how well black people do. If they're not doing well, neither are you. So you gotta keep pressing on.
Thank you. I want to just ask you a couple of questions that are more general in nature before we sum up. Beyond your extensive higher education work, you also have been a board member of a Saturday school in Montgomery County.
I still am.
What is the name of the program? How long have you been involved, and why are you involved in it?
Since 2006, I've been on the director for the George B. Thomas Learning Academy, better known as the Saturday School. It operates here in Montgomery County, Maryland. We serve over 3,500 students from K through 12, primarily African Americans and other minorities, and we have white students as well. And the whole focus is on academic achievement. We follow the curriculum of the Montgomery County Public Schools. Our sites are in 12 of the county schools is the in-kind services. We spend about just under $3 million a year on this program, and we have moved the needle for the kids who come through our program. We have made a difference, and we have on Saturday from 8 to 12:30, and we try to give them additional reading, scientific exposure, meeting with key professionals, and the like. And I've spoken a number of times at the schools. It's very important. It makes an impression, particularly in this county. We don't see too many African American men walk into a school with a suit and a tie on and talk about education. That's unusual.
And that's what happens every Saturday morning?
During the academic year.
What about other community involvement that means a lot to you?
Well, that's the primary thing I have time for, is a Saturday school.
You have fraternity connections?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi and active in our chapter here in Montgomery County, Mu Nu, and was recognized recently with the Founders Award for my contributions to the fraternity.
And there's another fraternity connection?
Sigma Pi Phi fraternity, yes. I'm in that too. I'm the president of that fraternity in this county.
And then you have been involved with the African American Methodist Heritage Center in what way?
At one time, I was the executive director of the foundation for about 3 years.
Why was it important to you to be involved in that?
Because it's dealing with the history of blacks in the United Methodist Church.
So you have 4 children,
Yes,
all HBCU graduates.
everyone, yes.
Would you like to name them and their schools?
Leonard IV, graduate of Howard. Ebony, graduate of Hampton, magna cum laude. And Bakari and Jabari, Southern University, with honors, yes. They're all doing well.
And your wife's name is
Mary.
Mary. And her connections with HBCUs or?
Yes, yeah, we met on the campus of Southern University. And over 50-some years ago. We were in our 50th anniversary year this year.
Congratulations.
Yes,
What was the date for that?
August 10th
Coming up. August 10th.
will be our 51st year. It's been a great joy. Very few people can say that. 50 years is the same moment. But we have the same interests. That makes it compatible. And the secret is never go to bed angry. It doesn't solve any problems.
Of what are you most proud?
My children and my grandchildren and my wife.
And of all the things you've done in your life, what has been the greatest blessing?
The ability to make a difference and to stay focused. You know, I'm a survivor of 2 major health issues. I had bypass surgery on my heart in 2007 and brain surgery in 2013. I'm not supposed to be here according to the medical records that people keep. But yet I'm here and I'm still functioning, which means God's not through with me yet. And he sees I'm making a difference. So that's the blessing.
Thank you for that. Can you tell me your age and birth date, please?
72. And I don't feel it, which is amazing. I have a lot of energy. I'm doing stuff all the time. My wife says, when are you going to slow down? I said, for what? I was born January 26, 1947.
1947?
Yeah.
And is there something I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
Well, do you have hobbies?
Do you have hobbies?
Yes, I do. And I'm interested in a lot of things, you know. Aside from reading all the time, you see all this stuff in this office. I'm also a collector of things from the Napoleonic period. You take these hussars over here from the French army of Napoleon. I have these. I've been collecting things like this for over 30-some years. There's another book on Napoleon. I must have read 30 books about him.
Why Napoleon?
He's one of the most fascinating military figures the world's ever produced. And he did a lot of crazy things, but his imprint on society is everlasting. The Napoleonic Code is the legal system for most of the world. He did this. The Emperor of France. If you go to Paris and see his tomb in the Invalids, it's one of the biggest tombs in the world. But he was a little man, short. But incisive when he made decisions. I just finished reading about him on Elba after he abdicated the first time. He went to this little island off the coast of Italy, and he was scouring the island trying to figure out, how am I going to do my life? I'm no longer the emperor. And people kept whispering in his ear, France needs you. You must return. So he staged his return. So when he landed back in France, the last 100 days started, he had a group of his old guard regiments. They circulated his back, and they all cried when they saw him. Vive l'Empereur! And so he marched all the way back to Paris and took over, ran the king out of business. Then he made the fatal mistake of going to Waterloo, as one of his generals let him down. But it just, the verities of life, you know, it just fascinates me. So he just stands out. Lincoln's another man too.
Abraham Lincoln?
I read a lot about him. No formal education, but yet the greatest president we've ever had. And cut down by an assassin's bullet, because he might do something with the newly freed slaves that this guy, John Wilkes Booth, couldn't handle. But Lincoln taught himself to read by candlelight. Amazing. No electricity now. That's why I say history doesn't begin when we show up. There are lessons to be learned.
Thank you. I do remember that one thing I didn't ask you about was how many honorary degrees you have.
14 honorary doctorates. One from Ohio State. You know, and from other white schools too. And I'm very proud of that.
Why?
Because it's an affirmation that you're making a contribution. Why else? You don't get any money. You know, they call you on the stage and says, would you just bow your head as we put this hood over you? I got them around here somewhere. My wife says, Leonard, we don't need another plaque in this house. They store it down in the basement. I got all kinds of stuff. Run out of space.
A different kind of collection.
Yeah. Look at this thing they gave me last year. You can't even pick it up. It took Mary and I. We had to both haul it out of the car. What's that? That's why they spend this money on this. They could have gave me the little light bulb. That would be fine. It's the black experience in America, though.
What do you mean?
Another chapter. Only Don King, the fight promoter, always says, only in America, when you can't explain it. So you can't take yourself too seriously either, you know. That's another thing I like. You gotta laugh at this stuff. Let it drive you crazy. Because you say, well, how did this happen? My dad says, it's a black experience, son. We came on a boat in the Middle Passage and some of us had a congenital defect. That's why we do these things. Doesn't make any sense. Just doesn't make any sense.
But there's been survival as well.
Despite it all, as they say, through it all, we're here for a reason. And half of us don't figure that out until it's too late. But what if we targeted our energies on saying to these young people, you gotta get a good education? And that's my concern. You know, these kids at Spelman, Morehouse, and Clark took the MCAT exam. That's how you get into medical school. And they all failed the other day. And we did an evaluation of what was the shortages, what happened. They failed English. They couldn't have English comprehension, chemistry, and organic chemistry. And the latter two are math-based, which means that, quote unquote, even some of our better institutions that tend to attract more competitive students, they are not doing it. That's got me concerned. The other thing that's got me really concerned is the fact we aren't training more black teachers to go into the K-12 space. My own alma mater last year, only one student finished with a degree in elementary education.
Which alma mater?
Southern. One student at an institution of 8,000 students. The public schools of Louisiana are black. New Orleans, Shreveport, Baton Rouge, Lake Charles, those are black schools. How are you going to function if you only train one at elementary? See, my dad's a philosopher, and he said, if you entrust the educational experience of black people just to white folk, you in trouble. You're not going to like the result, because they'll grow up confused. I'm seeing that now. I wouldn't trade my segregated education for nothing in the world. I am eternally grateful for segregation, because I had black teachers who cared about my advancement. And look how I turned out.
I think we'll end it there, unless you have something more you'd like to add.
No, but I've said a lot.
Thank you so much.